She has no legal standing here. None. She is a charity case my mother took pity on, and I will not allow her to hijack this proceeding. That was my brother, standing in the middle of a probate hearing in a beige conference room on the 14th floor of a law office in downtown Chicago, pointing at me like I was something that had crawled in off the street. I didn't say a word. I had learned a long time ago that silence is not weakness. Silence is a loaded gun. You just have to know when to pull the trigger. Let me back up. My mother died on a Tuesday in October. I found out on a Thursday because no one called me. My brother actually texted, 2 days after the funeral to let me know she was gone. He didn't apologize for the delay. He just said, Mom passed. Estate meeting is the 14th. Bring ID. That was it. No, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry? You okay? Just bring ID. Like I was showing up to claim a package at the post office. I had not spoken to most of my family in 4 years, not since the night my stepfather stood in the driveway of the house I grew up in and told me I was too ambitious for my own good and that I made everyone uncomfortable. My mother stood behind him and said nothing. My brother, who was 26 at the time and still living in their basement, smirked. I drove away that night and I didn't look back. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was what I had been doing during those 4 years of silence. My mother's name was Lorraine. She was a warm woman in the way that some warm women are also profoundly conflict-averse. The kind of person who would bake you a pie and then let someone else burn down your house while she watched and said she didn't want to get involved. She loved me. I believe that, but she loved peace more. And when peace required her to choose between me and the people who made my life smaller, she always chose them. Her husband, my stepfather, Walt, had 2 children from his first marriage. My brother, whose name I will tell you is Garrett, and his younger sister, Fiona. When my mother married Walt 15 years ago, we became a blended family in the technical sense only. Garrett treated me like a tenant who had overstayed her welcome. Fiona ignored me so completely it was almost impressive. I was the only one in that house who went to college. I got a full scholarship to Northwestern, accounting and finance, and I worked 20 hours a week to cover everything the scholarship didn't. Nobody came to my graduation. My mother said she didn't feel well. Walt said he had a thing. Garrett didn't bother with an excuse. I graduated with honors and took a job at a mid-sized financial consulting firm in the Loop. I was good at it. Within 3 years, I had been promoted twice. Within 5, I'd left to start my own LLC, Altine Financial Group, working with small business owners and real estate investors on tax structuring and asset protection. I was not rich, but I was building something real, and I was doing it alone, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I think I always knew that the day would come when that would matter. The estate meeting was held at the offices of a firm called Whitmore and Crane. Walt had died 2 years before my mother, and his estate had already been settled. Or so I'd been told secondhand through a cousin who felt sorry enough for me to pass along information nobody else would. My mother's estate was separate. She had her own assets, a life insurance policy, a savings account, and most significantly, a small commercial property in Wicker Park that she had inherited from her own mother 20 years ago. The building had 3 retail units on the ground floor and 2 apartments above. It wasn't enormous, but in that neighborhood it was worth somewhere between $1.1 and $1.4 million. I knew this because I had done the research. I'm a financial consultant. Researching asset values is what I do before breakfast. What I did not know, or rather, what I was not supposed to know, was that Garrett had been managing that property for the past 6 years under an informal arrangement with my mother. Collecting rent, handling maintenance requests, presumably keeping records, though I would come to learn that presumably was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. When I walked into the Whitmore and Crane conference room, Garrett was already there, sitting at the head of the table like he owned the place. Fiona was next to him. Their spouses were there. Walt's sister, a woman named Carol, who had always looked at me like I smelled funny, was in the corner. The estate attorney, a man named Mr. Tani Hessler, sat at the far end with a folder in front of him and the expression of someone who had seen this exact situation play out many times before and found it exhausting every single time. I took a seat. Garrett looked at me the way you look at a waiter who has come to the wrong table. "I didn't think you'd actually show up," he said. "I was notified," I said. "I came." Right. He turned away from me before I finished speaking. Mr. Hessler opened the meeting by explaining the basics of the estate. My mother had died with a valid will, last updated 14 months prior. He was about to begin reading the relevant provisions when Garrett interrupted him. Before we get into that, Garrett said, I want to put something on the table. Mr. Hessler paused. Of course. Garrett folded his hands. He had the self-satisfied posture of someone who would rehearse this. There's a question of the Wicker Park property. I've been managing that building for 6 years. I put in the time, the labor, I dealt with tenants, I handled every repair call, every lease negotiation. I did not needs to be recognized in how the estate is distributed. Fiona nodded beside him as if she'd been cued. My mother has a daughter too, I said. Has anyone acknowledged that? Garrett turned to look at me, and there it was, that slow, dismissive smile I remembered from every dinner table argument of my adolescence. You've been gone 4 years, he said. You want to walk back in here and claim an inheritance like you were part of this family. I am part of this family. You showed up to exactly 0 holidays. 0. Mom was sick last spring and you didn't come, you didn't call, and now you're here for the money. He shook his head. That's who you are. That's exactly who you are. I looked at him. I thought about all the things I could say. I didn't say any of them. Let's hear the will, I said. The will was not what Garrett expected. My mother, it turned out, had been more clear-eyed than any of us had given her credit for. The savings account and the life insurance policy were split evenly, 1/3 to Garrett, 1/3 to Fiona, 1/3 to me. Standard. No surprises. The Wicker Park property was different. My mother had left it entirely to me. The room went very still. Garrett's face did something complicated. The smile disappeared first, then the color, then whatever composure he had walked in with. That's not right, he said. Mr. Hessler looked up from the document. I'm sorry, that's not right. I'd been managing that property for 6 years. 6 years. That building is half mine by any reasonable standard. What she's done here, what she was talked into, this is not right. The will is clear, Mr. Hessler said. The will was written by a woman who was being manipulated. Garrett was on his feet now. He pointed at me across the conference table. She shows up after 4 years of nothing, works on a sick woman's emotions, and walks away with $1 million building. This is elder financial abuse. I will contest this. I said nothing. Fiona grabbed his arm. Garrett, I will contest this. His voice had gone up half an octave. She has no legal standing here. None. She is a charity case my mother took pity on, and I will not allow her to hijack this proceeding. Carol murmured something from the corner. I looked at my hands on the table. I looked at the grain of the wood. I waited. Mr. Hessler said quietly, Garrett, I need to ask you to sit down. Here is what Garrett did not know. He did not know that I had spoken to my mother 4 months before she died. Not in person. She had called me. It was a Sunday afternoon in June. I was reviewing a client's quarterly report, and I almost didn't pick up, but I did. She said she was tired. She said she was sorry. She said a lot of things I'm not going to repeat here because they belong to me and to her and to nobody else. But she also said that she had been watching what was happening with the property, and she was worried. She told me that Garrett's record-keeping had gaps. She said she'd found receipts that didn't match deposits. She said she didn't know what to do. I told her what to do. I told her to call him. I didn't explain myself. I didn't tell him exactly what documentation she should request from Garrett, and I told her that I would help her sort through it if she wanted me to. She did update the will, and she did request the documentation. What Garrett did not know was that she had sent me copies of everything. Every bank statement, every lease agreement, every rent receipt, every maintenance invoice she'd been able to gather. She had mailed them to my office in a manila envelope with no return address, 3 weeks before she died. I had spent the last month going through that envelope. Contesting a will in Illinois is not simple. You can't just say you don't like it. You need grounds. Undue influence, lack of testamentary capacity, fraud, or improper execution. Garrett's attorney, a man named Mr. Tote Pruitt, who showed up to the follow-up meeting 6 days later looking like he'd been briefed very quickly on a very complex situation, opened with undue influence. He claimed I had manipulated my mother during her final months, exploited a deteriorating relationship, and pressured her into changing the will in my favor. It was a creative argument. It was also entirely backwards. I let him make it. I sat across from Garrett and his attorney, and I let them build the whole structure. The timeline, the allegations, the implication that I was a scheming outsider who had swooped in to steal from a grieving family. Garrett added color commentary. At one point, he said that I had always had a talent for making people feel sorry for me, and that my mother was not in a state to make sound decisions in her final year. Mr. Pruitt submitted a formal challenge with the probate court. My attorney, a woman named Miss Intine Vance, who I had retained the week I received that manila envelope, filed our response 14 days later. The hearing was a Tuesday morning in February. The courtroom was not dramatic in the way courtrooms are in movies. It was a probate courtroom, which means it was small and fluorescent lit and smelled faintly of old carpet. The judge was a woman in her 60s named the Honorable Patricia Kwan, and she had the particular energy of someone who had heard every flavor of family dispute and had run out of patience for the ones that wasted her time. Garrett arrived with Mr. Chursus, Pruitt, and with Fiona, who apparently was now involved enough to attend court, but not involved enough to be listed as a party. Carol was there too. They sat on one side. I sat on the other with Miss Vance. Mr. Pruitt opened. He presented the timeline of my estrangement, characterized my phone call with my mother in June as strategic rather than genuine, and argued that the will change, occurring only 14 months before her death, during a period of declining health, was the product of my undue influence. He was confident. He had clearly done this before. When it was our turn, Ms. Vance stood up and said, "Your Honor, we'd like to submit into evidence the financial records of the Wicker Park property. Covering the period from January of the year Mr. Many, Garrett assumed management responsibilities to the present." She placed a binder on the plaintiff's table. Mr. Pruitt blinked. "I'm not sure what relevance—" "The relevance," Miss Vance said, "is that Mr. Pruitt twive Garrett's claim of legitimate management, which he is using to support his assertion of equitable interest in the property, depends on accurate record-keeping and proper handling of rental income. These documents show a pattern of inconsistency that the estate will be arguing reflects not diligent management, but something else." Judge Kwan leaned forward. She looked at the binder. She looked at Mr. Pruitt. She looked at Mr. Pruitt. She looked at Garrett. "Counsel," she said to Mr. Pruitt. "Pruitt, were you aware of these records before today?" There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. "We were aware that records existed," Mr. Pruitt said carefully. "Were you aware of their contents?" Another pause. Judge Kwan looked at Garrett. "Sir, you have represented to this court that you managed this property diligently for 6 years, and that this constitutes a basis for equitable interest in the estate. Is that correct?" Garrett straightened. "Yes, Your Honor. I put in significant time and—" "I'm going to ask you a direct question," Judge Kwan said, "and I want a direct answer. Are you aware of any discrepancy between the rental income collected on the Wicker Park property and the amounts deposited into the estate account during the period of your management?" The room was quiet. I watched Garrett's face. I watched him understand, in real time, that the ground had shifted. "There may have been some administrative errors," he said. "Administrative errors," Judge Kwan repeated. "Record-keeping gaps, nothing intentional." Judge Kwan looked down at the binder. "Miss Kwan." Vance had flagged the relevant pages with yellow tabs. There were a lot of yellow tabs. "Counsel," the judge said to Mr. Pruitt, "I'm going to suggest that before we proceed any further with a will contest based on undue influence, your client and his team take some time to review the documents that have just been submitted, because I am looking at what appears to be a significant and consistent shortfall between rental income and deposited funds over a period of approximately 4 years, and I want to make sure everyone in this courtroom is on the same page about what we are actually here to discuss today." "Mr. Does that?" Pruitt leaned toward Garrett and said something in a low voice. Garrett shook his head. He said something back. Mr. Pruitt said something else. Garrett said loudly enough for the room to hear, "I'm not dropping this." Judge Kwan looked at him over her glasses. Mr. Kwan looked at him over her glasses. Mr. Kwan. "Garrett," she said, "I want to be very precise with you. The documents submitted by the respondent suggest potential misappropriation of estate assets during your period of management. That is a serious matter, separate from and potentially more consequential than the will contest you have brought before this court. I would strongly encourage you to consider your next steps carefully." She let that land. Then she said, "Do you still wish to proceed with the contest?" I had not cried once through any of this, not when I got the text about my mother, not at the initial estate meeting, not when Garrett called me a charity case in front of everyone, not through any of the preparation, the document review, the late nights at my kitchen table with a glass of water and 6 months of bank statements spread out in front of me. I had not cried because I couldn't afford to. I had to be the person who held all of it together, who knew where every number came from, who understood what every discrepancy meant. I had built my entire career on being precise when other people were emotional, and I needed that skill more in those months than I had ever needed it professionally. But sitting in that courtroom, listening to Judge Kwan speak, I felt something I had not expected. Not triumph, exactly. More like the settling of something that had been off balance for a very long time. Mr. Pruitt asked for a 30-day continuance to review the new documents. Judge Kwan granted it. In those 30 days, Garrett dropped the will contest. He didn't call me. He didn't reach out through any channel. Ms. Vance received a letter from Mr. Pruitt's office stating that the plaintiff was withdrawing the challenge. No explanation. No explanation. No apology. Just withdrawal. Ms. Vance told me the letter had a second, attached document, a proposal for a settlement agreement in which Garrett would return a specified amount of funds to the estate in exchange for not being referred to the Cook County State's Attorney's Office for investigation. I reviewed the numbers. They were not the full amount of the discrepancy, but they were substantial. I took the agreement. Some people in my position might have pushed further, gone for referral, gone for maximum exposure, made it as public and painful as possible. I understand that impulse. I've sat with it. But I'm a financial person. I think in terms of cost, outcome, and time. The settlement got the estate what it was owed, resolved the contest, and cleared the path for me to take ownership of the property. Protracted litigation would have cost more in attorney's fees than it recovered. And honestly, I was tired. 4 years of silence, and then 4 months of this. I was tired in a way that a clean resolution could fix and a courtroom war could not. I own the Wicker Park building now. The tenants are good. A coffee shop, a small clothing boutique, and a tax prep office on the ground floor, and 2 long-term residential tenants upstairs. The first month I collected rent, I sat in my car in the parking garage near my office for a few minutes before I drove home. Just sat there. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It was quiet. It was the kind of quiet that only comes after something loud has finally stopped. I've hired a property management company to handle the day-to-day because I know my limits and landlording is not my profession. But I review the financials myself every month. I will always review the financials myself. My stepfather's family, Walt's people, Carol, all of them have not contacted me. Fiona sent a single text 3 weeks after the hearing that said, "I hope you're happy." I didn't respond. There wasn't anything to say that would have meant anything to her. Garrett. I have not heard from at all. My mother left me something real. Not just the property. Though that matters. It matters enormously, and I don't pretend otherwise. She left me the knowledge that in the end, she saw clearly that when it came down to it, she knew who had been paying attention, who had been careful, who had built something instead of just taking things. I think about that phone call in June more than I think about the courtroom. The sound of her voice. The way she said my name. She sounded like she had been carrying something heavy for a long time and was setting it down. I know that feeling now. People ask me sometimes what the lesson is. What's the takeaway, the moral, the thing they should carry with them? I'm never sure I have a good answer, because I'm not sure real life works the way those questions assume. But if I'm being honest, this is what I know. I spent years being told I was too much and not enough simultaneously. Too ambitious. Too serious, not warm enough, not present enough, never the right version of myself for people who had already decided what they wanted me to be. And I made the mistake, for a long time, of arguing with that, of trying to explain myself, of making my case out loud in rooms where no one was listening. What changed everything wasn't one dramatic moment in a courtroom. It was 4 years of quiet work. It was a scholarship I earned and no one showed up for. It was a business I built at my kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night. It was a phone call I almost didn't answer. It was a manila envelope I almost didn't open. The courtroom was just the room where all of it finally became visible. When Judge Kwan asked Garrett if he still wanted to proceed, and the silence stretched out, and Mr. Pruitt leaned over to talk him down, I didn't feel like I'd want to fight. I felt like a ledger had finally balanced. That's all it ever was, really. A ledger that needed to balance. That's all it ever was, really. A ledger that needed to balance. There's a version of this story where I walk into that probate courtroom angry, where I need Garrett to see it on my face. The years of being dismissed, the graduation nobody showed up to, the driveway conversation where my stepfather told me I made everyone uncomfortable. I used to think justice would feel like that. Loud, visible, like something you could point to. It didn't feel like that at all. What I remember most from that Tuesday morning in February isn't Garrett's face when Mr. Hessler read the will. It isn't Judge Kwan asking him if he still wanted to proceed. It's the manila envelope my mother mailed to my office 3 weeks before she died. No return address. Just the documents, organized with a note in her handwriting that said, "You'll know what to do with these." She was right. I did know, because I had spent a decade learning exactly that. How to read a financial record, how to find the number that doesn't match, how to build a case from paper instead of from noise. That knowledge didn't come from talent. It came from choosing, over and over again, to become someone who was useful and precise when everyone around me was neither. I think about cause and effect a lot, not in a mystical way. I'm an accountant at heart. I think in columns that have to balance, but I do believe that what you put in is what eventually comes back, and not always in the form you expect. Garrett put in 6 years of cutting corners, of assuming no one was watching, of treating a property that wasn't his like it was an ATM with no receipts. I put in 4 years of building something real and quiet and mine. The courtroom didn't create the outcome. The outcome already existed in the ledger. The courtroom just made it visible. What I want to say to anyone who has ever been the person in the room that nobody took seriously is this: the work you do in private is not invisible. It accumulates. Your integrity accumulates. The choices you make when no one is rewarding you for them, when no one is even watching, your judgment accumulates. The skill you build not because someone pushed you, but because you decided that knowing things mattered. And your endurance accumulates most of all. The willingness to keep going through the years when nothing is being handed to you and no one is showing up for your milestones and you are doing it anyway because it is yours and it is real. Garrett had the easier path for a long time. I had the harder one. But the harder path built something load-bearing, and when the weight finally came down, mine held. My mother knew that. She knew it when she wrote that note. She knew it when she mailed the envelope. She knew it when she mailed the envelope. She knew it when she updated the will. I think she had known it for longer than I realized, and she just ran out of time to say it in person. I don't need her to have said it. The ledger said it. That's enough for me.